Over the last few days, a number of you have brought up the question as to whether we could possibly see another gold confiscation if gold is revalued over the next year or so. Today, I'd like to talk about how the system works so we can clarify that point. I'm going to summarize the process so that the video won't be too long. So if you want a more detailed explanation, please let me know and I'll dig into it a little bit further. Okay, here goes. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued an executive order requiring that Americans turn in their gold. In exchange, they would be paid a little over $20 an ounce, which was the going rate for gold at that time. If anyone refused, however, they would be fined $10,000 and may have to spend up to 10 years in prison. In today's dollars, that's the equivalent of a fine of over $200,000. So understandably, people were scared, and many did turn in their gold for that $20 an ounce price. Then, less than a year later, in 1934, Roosevelt revalued gold to $35 an ounce. In other words, the US government screwed its own people. So you may be familiar with the story, it can be found just about everywhere, but you may not know about this next part. Not all gold was treated the same way. Yeah, Americans were required to turn in gold coins, gold bullion, and their gold certificates, but they were allowed to keep some coins, about $100 worth, which was about 5 ounces at the time. Moreover, you could keep any gold that was slated for use in art, jewelry, or some sort of manufacturing like dental work. Most importantly, however, rare, aged, or unusual gold coins were exempt. Of course, history shows that enforcement of this executive order was far from perfect. In fact, estimates suggest that only about a third of all privately held gold at that time was actually turned in, meaning a massive amount of gold held by private individuals like you and me was never surrendered over to the government. Okay, so I know you're asking, great history, but we live in a very different world today. What would happen today if the government wanted to revalue gold? Could the president sign an executive order and confiscate all our coins, bullion, gold bars? Most analysts today say that if the president, with the support of the Fed chair, wanted to restrict gold, it would almost certainly start with our paper-based assets, things like ETFs, retirement accounts, large institutional holdings, that sort of thing. Why? Because they're far easier to track and to regulate than physical gold. Analysts also say that it's pretty unlikely that outright physical gold would be confiscated today. Instead, the government would probably be more likely to require us stackers to declare exactly what's in our possession, perhaps pay extra taxes on the sale of any sort of gold that we have, or cap the amounts of gold that we can buy and sell. So you're probably asking yourself right about now, so if gold is revalued to $15,000 an ounce or something around there, as we talked about in a video a few days ago, how would we cash it in if bullion dealers don't want to buy it or they can't buy it because of these sorts of restrictions? When trust in cash fades, people don't stop doing business. Instead, they just start negotiating in a different way. In other words, in other countries that have experienced something similar, gold holders who can't easily cash in usually instead find people who are willing to trade a hard asset for their gold. For instance, a trade of gold for a car or some real estate. So if gold gets revalued and cash becomes less trusted, asset for asset trades won't sound so crazy anymore. They'll actually sound pretty normal. So tell me, would you trade ounces of gold for property? Would you trade some real estate for some gold? I'd love to hear how you're thinking about this.